It is currently past midnight and I'm recording this. Is it wise to be doing this? I don't know. Hey everyone, Dan here, and Inside No.9, Series 9 is finished tonight, or last night as I'm recording it, and yeah, Inside No.9 has finished. So today is my Series 9 review that I've done. I've done these like contemporary reviews for Series 6, Series 7 and Series 8, and I've of course done retrospectives on the previous series, and it just feels weird that number 9 is over. And yeah, whilst number 9 is over, you can't ignore the impact that it's had and the longevity that it's had. For a show like that, a niche anthology show to last a decade, from 2014 to now, not many shows last that long. That's usually reserved for your sitcoms and your big budget spectacle shows like The Sopranos or Game of Thrones or Friends. Inside No.9 has lasted as long as Friends. That's pretty mad. Anyway, there was a lot riding on Series 9, you know, the last series, you know, and for me, I think it was a worthy send-off. It was much better than Series 8 from last year. You know, Series 9 is definitely in line with a lot of my favourite series, so stuff like Series 2, 3, 5 and 7, those are my favourites, and that's because they're the most bold and the most daring and experimental and the least formulaic, and I think Series 9 is in that similar vein. You know, they explore so many different settings and presentation styles, and then there's the final episode, which we will get to. And the thing is, that's why I love Inside No.9, because of how different and unique it is compared to so many other shows. So I don't like it when it's a bit more formulaic and a bit more standard. I like it when it's a bit daring and bold, even if they don't always pay off. I prefer it like that. So that's why this is one of my favourite series. I don't know whereabouts it would come in like a full show ranking, but it's high up, I can tell you that. Anyway, enough preamble. Let's get on with reviewing all 6 episodes, and of course, spoilers. So starting off, we have To A Goose, which for my money is one of the strongest openers of any series of number 9. It's a really effective hook into the series. It's just a really strong story, very creative, very unique, but also it really stuck with me. And it was quite it was right up my alley, this one was. Now the first thing that comes to mind with this one is the setting of the train, which is just perfect for me. I mean, recently, in sort of the past year-ish, I've been commuting more by train, so this kind of story was going to connect with me, and seeing the kind of behaviour on trains, it's quite interesting and kind of eye-opening, and it's kind of perfect for a number 9, because nobody ever wants to talk to each other. You're all crammed in this space, and all these strangers, they don't want to talk to each other, and you get all these wildly different personalities. It's great. And also, funny enough, actually, the week of this episode broadcast, I was on the train, and I thought to myself, the see it, say it, sorted sign, the message would have been, it's quite ominous. It's almost like dystopian. It's like very ominous. I thought it'd be really cool for a story like this. So to see that kind of unfold like this in To A Goose, I thought was great to see it. And a lot of the goodwill I have towards this episode really comes from the setting of the train and how it really brings a lot out of the cast of characters. It's more of an ensemble piece, this one, which I love. You get all these different personalities, you know, and of course Steve is hilarious as well. He's really funny, but so is Reece as well. I can't remember his name, but he gives me kind of vibes of Martin from Friday Night Dinner. They're kind of like awkward, a bit sort of awkward and more understated in how kind of funny he was. He's very, he's very uptight and all good standing. You know, it was very enjoyable. And so with the rest of the cast, they all bounced off each other really well, and you just saw as the episode went on the sort of tensions rising, and it was really compelling and effective to see, and their different ideologies clashing with each other. It was just really compelling stuff. And then that ultimately brings out a theme of sort of passivity and activity, you know, in the characters. Who's going to remain passive and silent in all of this, and who's going to sort of stand up and make a change and whatnot. I think it's a compelling theme, a compelling dilemma, and it was really well done. And then the twist was really effective, the kind of body snatches to us, because it does start off very grounded, very, you know, relatable, kind of sort of influenced very much by modern social trends and dynamics, and then it becomes this kind of dystopian, almost sci-fi body snatcher sort of story. But I don't think it came out of nowhere. I think the score, the sort of synthy score, was a good indicator for me anyway, of kind of suggesting something more sci-fi. It reminded me a bit of like an 80s Doctor Who story or something like that. But yeah, it did give off that kind of sci-fi tone. It was a good indicator. And it ultimately did benefit the story of, you know, being passive and active, like what could happen if you remain passive. I think it was very interesting. It doesn't necessarily pick a side, you know, it's a nuanced dilemma, and I think it's really well done. And the twist, even though it is a sort of genre bending sort of twist, it does inform the rest of the story, so it works and it fits really well. So I love this one, 9 out of 10 I'd give it, and yeah, it's a really strong one of the best openers of the show. Episode 2 now, The Trolley Problem, which for me is the easy weak point of the season. It's my least favourite this season, and it's not an awful episode, it's not terrible, but it didn't really hit the mark for me. It was a bit of an odd one. I felt like there was something missing, and I came out of it with an overriding sentiment of just, Now I'll start with the positives, because it was a well-made episode, well put together. You know, the direction was really strong. You know, it was a really good spooky atmosphere with the storm, and it helped with the atmosphere. It was quite spooky in that way. It was a good two-hander with Stephen Reece. You know, quite stripped back and simplistic. And they can be some great episodes. You know, Bernie Clifton's dressing room, these kind of two-handers when it's a limited cast of just Stephen Reece, and they do have a good dynamic together, I think. And I also like the exploration of the sort of psychology of like the trolley problem dilemma and like the kind of morality at play. It's a decent idea. They could have maybe gone further with it, I don't know, but ultimately my main issues with the story come with the plotting and the script. It's one of the, I think, the sloppiest scripts of any number 9 story, and yeah, for Reece and Steve, that's quite a rarity, so it sticks out for me more, I think. I think at the start of the episode, I think the story fails to endear you to these characters. You can't really get endeared to them, and you can't let the episode really wash over you, because they're already planting these clues of that the characters, particularly Reece's character, has ulterior motives. You just, I don't know, you don't really get endeared to them, and I think on a second watch that would be more rewarding, I think, if you were endeared to them on a first, so you could be like, oh, you were kind of tricked and whatnot. Here, I already was kind of having to second guess automatically, okay, what's Reece planning, what's Steve planning and whatnot, and it just I didn't really connect with it. And so a lot of the drama that comes towards the end of the story with Reece's kid and whatnot, and well, actually both their kids, it just didn't really have as much impact as I think it probably would have been had I got to really know these characters beforehand without having to try and second guess everything. And for me, the real blind spot that just took me right out of the episode, that has never left me since watching it, it was, so at this point in the story, Steve knows that Reece has a gun and is automatically suspicious of him. In fact, when Reece goes to the bathroom, at one point, Steve is already sort of on, like, clearly suspicious and on high alert. So a bit later on, when they've got 2 mugs of tea and whatnot, and Steve is gone, Reece drugs the tea, and Steve, despite having a habit for drugging people's drinks, still drinks the tea. And I'm thinking, you're not that dumb to think that you would, to not suspect anything, or to be not even be more careful. That just seemed like a real blind spot to me. It just, again, it was a rarity for number 9. They're usually, their scripts are usually a lot tighter than that, and that just seemed quite sloppy. As I say, it might seem like a bit of a minor point. It's not like the biggest scene in the episode, even though actually another problem with that scene, it is kind of just sort of, you know, this sort of revenge sort of thing, you know, with the drug and the tea. It's kind of cribbing like Riddle of the Sphinx, and then the whole revenge with a kid, you know, kind of cribbing The Last Weekend, which was literally last season, you know. So I don't know, this one didn't really do it for me in the script department. It was a well-made, well-put-together episode, but the script let it down. So 7 out of 10, that's quite a light 7 out of 10. So it's one of the weaker episodes for me of the show, and definitely this season's weakest. Okay, episode 3, we are now back in business with Mulberry Close, which I saw a few people weren't mad on this episode, but I love this one. It's one of my favourites of the season, and until the finale came along, this would have been the top of the list. But yeah, this one, it's another one of the format experiment ones, and I love those ones, you know, the likes of A Quiet Night In, Cold Comfort, The Devil of Christmas, etc, etc. I love it when number 9 plays around with the presentation of a story, and this time the story's presented entirely through the doorbell ring camera, which it's just such a creative, unique, inventive way of telling the story. Not only does it lead to some pretty good humour, like when, you know, obviously because it only shows any sort of movement that's detected, so stuff like the foxes or the learner driver, but it also works thematically in the story because the audience don't have a full picture of the event because of that lens. It's not like 24/7 security, so some of the characters also don't have the full context for the scenarios, and they might make poorly judged decisions based on this, which is quite interesting, and the presentation reinforces that kind of perspective in the narrative. Like it's woven together really well. Another interesting thing that the presentation does is, even though most of the action you see is outside, you know, even though it's inside number 9, there is a kind of claustrophobic sense, which is true to number 9, with the estate setting, because you do have this restricted view of just this little pocket of the estate. And also these estates are generally quite closed off, and Damon and Val, who are the new couple, they kind of fish out of water, so they're not used to the values and customs of the kind of close-knit neighbours, which is quite common in these sort of areas, and it creates that kind of conflict, which it's very effective. It reminds me a bit of one of my favourite episodes from Series 7, Merrily Merrily, which obviously takes place on the lake outside, even though, even though it's not inside, they are sort of theoretically and thematically inside, and they are kind of claustrophobic and trapped. And I think that the presentation of this episode conveys that in a similar way, despite the action taking place outdoors. I also mentioned that there's a bit of a conflict in the story with Damon and Val, mainly Damon, Reece's character, who he's a little bit closed off and it can come across maybe a little bit moody, but with how invasive like the neighbours are, like Ken and Sheila and Larry, with his dog Popcorn, I mean, they're great, but with them lot, they are very prying, and it would grate on you after a while, and they are multifaceted people. You know, your perception of them can shift and change throughout the episode, and I think it's just a really well-balanced, it's very nuanced. That's what I've noticed a lot in this series, you know, these kind of conflicts and characters, they're really nuanced, and I always love stories like that. I think some of the creepier stuff, like in the night sections, like there's that one with when Damon has like the creepy skeleton Halloween mask and whatnot, it's quite effective, bit of horror there. And obviously when things escalate towards the end of the episode, and when they finally examine the footage, it's it reveals all and whatnot, and then it leads to, for me, one of the funniest endings to any number 9 with the Michael Ball true crime drama, the Mulberry Close murders, which obviously was kind of mentioned in kind of ordinary passing conversation earlier by Sheila, and ultimately it comes back to bite her on the back, and it's just like it's proper, ironic and poetic justice. I was burst out laughing when that happened, because it's just perfect. And getting Michael Bourne as well to have a little voiceover cameo, it was just a perfect razor sharp gag to end the episode on, and I love this one, so I'm gonna give it a 10. For me, it was my favourite episode since Wise Owl from Series 7. This was I love this one. It was right up my alley. Episode 4 now, another really strong one here, Control Alt Escape. Again, another really great episode. Again, I think a bit like To A Goose, it had a fantastic setting. The escape room was something new and creative, and it was cool to see. And it also lended to a really great visual style. This episode had a great visual style, which I'll talk about more in relation to the twist later. But even just on a sort of first watch, on a base sensory level, the colours, like the reds and greens and blues, it's really great. The lighting, and also like the horror props, it creates a really unique and distinct atmosphere that visually, just aesthetically, it looks great. And as I said, I will get onto some of the strong visual cues relating to the twist in a minute. Now, the main plot for the first 2 acts wasn't anything mind-blowing. It was just this family, Jason and his wife and his 2 daughters, trying to work out this escape room. Jason's a bit of an escape room obsessive, and there's a sort of disconnect with some of the daughters, particularly Millie, who at first I thought was a bit broadly written as kind of moody teenager, but it was developed upon, so that kind of dissipated quite quickly, so that was good. And overall, like, the family dynamic, they weren't like, gonna break the mold or anything, but they were endearing, they were simple but effective, and I was rooting for them, especially when you see like Millie and Jason kind of reconnecting as a father and daughter. It was nice to see, I enjoyed it and I was engaged. I also thought Reece's manager character, he was quite funny, especially when he couldn't work the torch as well, which again, that comes up later on. And some of the more intense moments that sort of build up gradually over the course of the episode, I think were very effective. And then we get to the twist. Now, I think this twist there's a lot to unpack here, because it turns out that this escape room scenario is just a construct in Jason's head, as he's in a comatose state and he's on the brink of death. And there's a lot to it. So first of all, I love how this twist is not just a last minute 30 seconds at the end kind of gotcha. It's baked into the final acts of the episode. So it kind of allows a bit of breathing room for it to develop, for you to kind of get your head around it. And also it allows for you to get really kind of emotionally connected with the characters, you know, Jason's wife and kids, you know, they're like, you know, please don't die, and then you're rooting with them, so it gives you that time to really root with them, and you get an emotional connection. You know, it's a, as I say, it's a relatively simple story, but because there's that bit of time, that bit of breathing room, you want Jason to be all right in the end. You don't want him to die, which for number 9 could very easily have happened, but it didn't this time. And when I mentioned the visual style of the episode, there's a lot of visual cues and hints that come about and sort of have a double meaning when we learn about the twist of Jason's comatose state. So obviously there's the kind of obvious one of Dr. Death. You know, obviously Death is literally coming for Jason, and he's in the hospital, obviously, with the doctor, but the main sort of antagonist of the escape room is Dr. Death. You know, that's quite an overt one. But there's some other ones, like the torch I mentioned that Reece's character used, which is a bit sort of comical, like he can't work it in the escape room, but ultimately, Reece's doctor character is using it, so there's a nice little visual cue. Another one as well is in the escape room sort of plotline, they discuss an ice skating story from when the kids were younger, and there's also a star as like a clue, of one of the clues in the escape room. Now, at Jason's bedside in the hospital, you have a picture from that ice skating story in a star frame. Again, another just kind of visual cue that kind of links these two plot strands together. And there's several more, even dialogue. There's a line that Jason says to Millie when they're having a bit of a spat and they're kind of reconnected, and Jason says to her, "I'm so proud of you, I just wish you could hear that." Now, obviously there's a kind of, in the escape room thing, it's implied that obviously there's a bit of a disconnect with them, like a generational disconnect, and Jason doesn't feel like he can get through to his daughter. But in reality, because of his comatose state, she can't hear that because he's literally unable to tell her. There's these brilliant just hints and foreshadowings that have these double meanings, and it's really well done. And I think if I were to rewatch it, there'd be plenty more that I'd pick up on. And there's something else that I picked up on. It was sort of after the fact. Now, the ending of the episode, Jason ultimately lives. Jason Lives. That's a Friday the 13th film, wasn't it? Either way, Jason does end up living. He ends up, because of his kind of mental capacity to kind of solve these escape room kind of puzzles in his head, that's keeping his brain active, and ultimately that does resuscitate him. And the clue to get out of the escape room, it's the number 9, the code. That's the code to get out. And there's a part of me that kind of thinks something is like that is kind of meta in a way. It's Stephen Reece trying to get out of number 9. They are leaving it this series, obviously, and now that we're getting into the sort of the back end of the series, it's them starting to leave number 9. I don't know if this is just me reading too much into it, but I just felt there was something kind of meta about that. And also as well, kind of confirm this is to do with the final episode. They mentioned in that Steve faked being rushed to the hospital on the set of the escape room episode, which is the episode that Steve's character was in a hospital. Coincidence? I think not. I don't know, there's just something about that I just thought was kind of interesting. That was my personal reading of the episode. But overall, it's another really strong one, a 9 out of 10 from me. I think it's a really compelling, unique, fresh, strong one. Penultimate episode now, The Curse of the Ninth, which is an episode that I feel like I appreciated more than I really enjoyed. But it is a really well put together episode. It just wasn't, I don't think it fully came together, but it's not bad. It was very well made. First of all, I really like the fact that we got another historical episode. I think the only other time we got one was it Elizabeth Gage in Series 2? I can't think of any other ones that did like a historical sort of setting like this. And, you know, the production design, the costumes, it's all really well done and kind of captures that sort of Victorian-esque or like period piece atmosphere really well. Thing is, I'm not mad on historical kind of period piece stuff. Like the recent Doctor episode, Rogue, I wasn't too big on that. But this one wasn't in the same, like it wasn't the period setting that necessarily detracted for me. I think it was well realised, and I enjoyed the story. And I did think it had a strong like horror atmosphere, the kind of gothic atmosphere. I think it was very effective. The characters were quite fun. Reece was enjoyable. He kind of took the limelight. And Natalie Dormer as the guest star, I think she had a great screen presence and she was really good as well. And I think the plot around the music, and it was a good plot, you know. I think I like the stuff with the Reece character. He wanted to make it as a composer, but ended up being a piano tuner. And I think there's some things that, you know, a lot of artists, regardless of what your profession is specifically, can relate to. You know, stuff with like artistic integrity versus commercial success. There's that kind of interesting sort of, I guess, dilemma put in there. Again, really interesting stuff. And the way the episode explores the titular curse of the ninth, you know, the curse of the Ninth Symphony, after every musician and composer writes their ninth work, they are killed and whatnot. They end up dying mysteriously, and it's an interesting, mysterious idea to explore, and I think number 9 did it very well. But for me, I don't think I was fully engaged the whole way through, and for me, I think the reason I feel like that was the pacing. The episode never really settles down in a sense, because obviously the setting of the mansion, it's quite a big setting. It's not as confined as a lot of other number 9 stories are. And obviously, you know, they explore various rooms of the manor, even go into the grounds outside. Also, the body snatcher part, the grave robbing part, that was a good scene anyway. But getting back on topic, you know, they go to various locations in the house and whatnot, and the episode is also set across multiple days and also multiple times of the day. It's not like it doesn't take place in like linear time like quite a few other number 9s often do, to kind of keep that enclosed, confined atmosphere. It spreads its wings quite a bit, the story, and I don't feel like it ever settled down, so I don't really get too invested in the characters. And I don't know, I think that's why my attention drifted a little bit for this one. But even then, I think it was a solid one. I give it like an 8 out of 10. Again, a really strong one, and I like the story. I just think the pace didn't always hold my attention, but really well made, really well put together. And now the end is near with the final episode of Inside number 9, Plodding On. And I just want you to kind of understand that before going into this episode, we knew nothing about it. They didn't release a poster, there was no synopsis, no cast, nothing. So this could have gone anywhere. And the thing is, with how different number 9 is, how vast and loose and experimental and playful it is, how do you end a show like that in satisfying style? Because it's not about like character arcs being wrapped up necessarily. It's not like kind of long form show or what have you. So how do you end it in a satisfying way? What was this final episode going to be? Were we going to get like a League of Gentlemen crossover? Was it going to be all meta and whatever? Were we going to finally get the bus episode? The answer to all those in some way or another is yes. Now, my main prediction of what would happen, how they'd end the show, is that it would be something kind of meta, that we might see Steve and Reece playing, heightened versions of themselves, a la Deadline, But even I didn't see this episode coming. I did not expect how they were going to do it, by having so many of the previous cast members of all the episodes back for this, like, party, like, rap party kind of thing. And all these, like, homages, like, the episode opened with an homage to the very first episode, Sardines, with Catherine Parkinson and Tim Key. That was a great way to open it, kind of really bringing it full circle. And the references to previous episodes and like bringing back different cast members, it was great. So as I say, the Sardines one, having that at the beginning was perfect. Having Nick Mohammed from Simon Says, one of my personal favourite episodes, doing a sort of podcast interview. Remember, Simon Says there was a podcast and whatnot. That was really well done. What's her name? Rosie Cavallero from The Understudy. The little interaction with Steve, when he's kind of getting more famous. That to me felt like a bit of a parallel to what happened in The Understudy with Reece's actor character getting even more famous. It just, all the references and homages to previous episodes were so perfectly placed. The cameo that really kind of got to me, that was like, oh man, that was brilliant. It was the cameo from Emily Howlett, who was in, again, another one of my favourite episodes, Empty Orchestra, as Janet. I adore that episode, and I adore her inclusion and her performance in it, and her, obviously, representation as a deaf actress. So seeing her again was just like a joy. And also as well, because of how kind of melancholic Reece is for a bit of this episode, when he sort of sees her and kind of lights up, that just put a massive smile on my face. I love that. In fact, this is probably the Inside No.9 episode that I have smiled the most at, which I think is a very good way to end it off, I think. I mean, there's some absolutely cracking jokes like Anne Reid snorting coke, or the Tim Key joke at the end, which is perfectly set up as well. The music, Tears of Laughter, Time to Say Goodbye, great uses of those in some way, shape or another. But the main story, the main anchor, is about Steve and Reece moving on to new pastures new. Reece has this kind of detective project called Plodding On, but Steve has got this sort of American contract, and there's this kind of conflict. Again, another episode with this kind of conflict. And it feels this blend of like fact and fiction, because you have them playing themselves. It made it even more compelling because you don't quite know where the actors end and the character begin. How much of this is influenced by real life? I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, and it just made it hit harder. I think I am just at a point in life where I connect with these stories of like moving forward, and obviously, I mean, stuff that's quite reflective and retrospective. I am connecting with that at the moment, and obviously this reflective look back on the past 10 years is very heartfelt, profound, and I think it's really profound of like how much they have done in the past decade, how many people have been involved, and even the people that are no longer with us, like in the little montage, there's Helen McCrory shows up, David Warner, who are sadly no longer with us. They've done so much with this show. It probably will be their magnum opus. I think it will be, but it is always important to move forward, but appreciating the people that you have, obviously in the sense of the show, but also the Stephen Reece characters, appreciating what they have, and it was a perfect send-off. And we finally got the bus episode, kind of. That was again a perfect little treat at the end of the episode, and it was just, I loved this episode, and it was just it was a perfect way to end it. But I feel like in the context of this series, it's hard to talk about. Like, you kind of have to talk about this one in a vacuum. It's very much its own thing. It's difficult to sort of compare and talk about, but this is for me the best of the season. So I mean, giving it a 10, of course, but I mean, bravo, Stephen Reece, And that's Inside No.9, Series 9. That's the entire show done, and here's my little ranking of all the episodes. Again, I really love this season. It's a really strong one. Only the Trolley Problem, which is at the bottom of the list, wasn't too bad on, but it's not as worse as, some of the other weakest episodes, like an And the Winner Is or a 9 Lives Cat. It's not quite that level, which is a good sign. And then at the top, I've got Mulberry Close and Plodding On. Some really great, fantastic episodes, some real all-timers there. And although it is sad to be saying goodbye to Inside No.9, as Reece Shearsmith once said,
Auntie Val, sometimes you can't go back.
I know.
But you can visit.
Yes. You can visit.